Our very special guest this week is Mr. Carlos Lopez. He is the Executive Director of UNITAR, the United Nations branch in charge of research and training. In Dakar for a high-level meeting organized by UNITAR and UNDP, he took some time to discuss Africa's economic growth in a context of global crisis.
I'm from Guinea-Bissau. I've been working with the UN for about 22 years. I started as an economist working in African issues, and now I'm the Assistant Secretary General in charge of training institutions. There is one in Geneva called UNITAR, United Nations Institute for Training and Research, and one in Turin, Italy, the UN Staff College, which is more for training inside the UN, and I'm the director of both.
This week, UNITAR and UNDP have organized a major conference. Can you tell us what was the theme of this conference and why it was important to unite and gather all these stakeholders?
The main theme is the relationship between Africa and emerging partners, and we know that they are occupying a lot of interest and space. But we were looking into two issues that are a bit more circumscribed, the issue of trade and the issue of investment. Because normally these issues are really the drivers of this new relationship with the emerging partners. Everybody knows about China, they know less about others such as Brazil, India, Turkey, Korea, Malaysia, United Arab Emirates. So these are countries that are investing a lot in Africa, that are trading more with Africa, and that we need to understand better what they bring and what kind of strategies we need to deal with them.
In world trade, what is today the position of Africa, and how do you see the future of the continent regarding trade and investment?
You see, when we look into trade between Africa and the world, until quite recently, just a decade ago, it was about 1% of the global trade. So people would say that is really ridiculous, it's very small. It has now increased to about 3%, which is quite an incredible growth. And for those who think this is not good enough, I would say 3% is as much as Brazil trade with the world. So currently the size of trade between Africa and the world is comparable to Brazil. Brazil is just a country and Africa is a continent, so we need to do much better. And I think we are getting there because there is huge demand for African products. Particularly commodities, but Africa has also to evolve in the way it trades with the world. It has to be much more value-added products. So we need to industrialize, we need to grab the new technologies, and we need also to expand our service sector. Some of this is already happening, but we need to accelerate. The best metaphor to describe what we need to do is that while others are walking, we need to run.
You are talking about Africa, but Africa in a whole, but I guess that there are some negative points and maybe some weak links in Africa. What are the countries that are really ahead in the term of trade and investment with the world? Is it more North Africa or South Africa?
Well, in fact, you know, if you look into the IMF projections, they say that 6 out of the 10 fastest growing countries in the decade are going to be African. And this is very interesting because the 6 that they have pointed to are all in sub-Saharan Africa, not in North Africa. Although North Africa has better indicators in terms of social indicators and even size of their economies, like for instance, you know, a country like Egypt or a country like Algeria, very large economies. In fact, they are not really growing as fast as parts of sub-Saharan Africa. The country that is growing the fastest in Africa is Equatorial Guinea, but that is very much linked to incredible oil production explosion in the last decade. But you have countries like Angola, you have countries like Ethiopia, you have countries like Ghana that are growing at a very fast pace and are attracting a lot of investment. Not to mention that most of the investment towards Africa continues to go to South Africa. We tend to forget because South Africa has always been a magnet and has always been important, but it continues to be a sizable economy that attracts a lot of trade and investment.
And what about West Africa, this region where you are from Guinea-Bissau, where you are holding this conference here in Senegal? What about West Africa?
Well, we are not doing that bad, despite some of the countries just being out of civil wars and conflicts and not having attractiveness, if you want. West Africa is doing rather well. One of the fastest growing countries in the world is going to be, in this decade, Ghana. There is a lot of oil discoveries along the coast. Nigeria is taking back its role as a leader. In fact, there are projections by major analysts like JP Morgan, Ernst & Young and others that are saying that the size of the Nigerian economy is going to grow so much in the next 25 years that maybe it will overtake the size of South African economy. I think that is in the optimistic side, but it is clear that there is movement in our region as well. Senegal is not doing that bad in terms of economic growth, and even a country like mine that is not one of the best examples in terms of performance is going to grow between 3 and 4%, which is not that bad. So I think in general terms we can consider that this region is not behind the rest of other regions in Africa in terms of growth. The problem is the quality of growth. Very often we say growth, and it's relatively easy to talk about growth in Africa these days because all countries are growing. But the problem is the quality of growth. And to define quality of growth, we need to know whether this is just based on commodities or is it based on some industrial development, more sophisticated structures of the economy. And also the other factor that I think is very important is how is the distribution of income being done. So we don't have increasing levels of poverty despite the fact that we have growth.
Well, thanks a lot for being our guest on eMag.
Thank you.
Let us now take a look at this week's international news roundup.
The Japanese Prime Minister has announced that the Fukushima plant has been brought to a cold shutdown. Water in the damaged reactors is below the boiling point, which means that the fuel cannot reheat. The shutdown comes 9 months after the earthquake and tsunami that damaged the plant. 80,000 people were evacuated from the area. Authorities say it could take up to 40 years to fully decommission the plant and clean up the radiation. The French court has sentenced Ilic Ramirez Sanchez, better known as Carlos, to life in prison. He was convicted of 4 bomb attacks between 1982 and 1983, which killed 11 people and wounded over 100. During his 5-hour closing statement on Thursday, he read a homage to Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. Mr. Sanchez's lawyer says he will appeal. After 18 years of negotiations, Russia finally became a member of the World Trade Organization on Friday. Switzerland brokered a deal between Russia and Georgia, which has opposed Russian membership since the 2008 conflict between the two countries. Tariffs on 700 Russian exports will be lifted. Russia was the largest economy outside the WTO. Thousands of Argentine football fans marched on the French embassy in Buenos Aires on Thursday to reclaim the site where the San Lorenzo Stadium once stood, which is now occupied by a Carrefour supermarket. San Lorenzo de Almagro is one of the oldest clubs in Argentina. Residents of the neighborhood submitted a petition to the French ambassador requesting that the site be shared.
Well, that's all for this week's eMag. Thank you very much for watching us on your national television. We'll see you next week, same time, same channel. Until then, take good care of yourselves.